Hey folks, you know I take my trail camera intel pretty seriously. It's a huge part of how I build my hunting strategy, and I'm always looking for gear that just flat out works. Stuff I can rely on. Backed by solid people and the best customer support in the business. That's exactly why I run Tacticam Reveal cell cameras. Whether you're just getting started or you're a full-blown data junkie like me, they've got a camera to fit your budget and your hunting style. My go-to currently is the Reveal 3.0 series with fully integrated GPS. These things are dead simple to set up. Less fiddling, more scouting and hunting. And they run on most major service providers and will automatically connect you to the strongest signal in your area. So no more hiking to the top of a ridge just to realize you've got the wrong service provider. Been there, not fun. Here's the kicker. You don't even need an SD card. That means fewer trips in, less pressure on your spots, and more real-time intel sent straight to your phone. And if you pair it with a Reveal solar panel or a lithium cartridge, you can keep those cameras running longer and spend more time doing what actually matters. Scouting new ground, dialing in a setup, or maybe, just maybe, finally cleaning the garage like you told your wife you would before the season started. Don't just take my word for it. Check out Tacticam Reveal at tacticam.com. Tacticam. Everything you need to take your hunting to the next level. Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Oscio gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Oscio's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Oscio. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Tacticam Reveal Cellular Cameras. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 445. Today, I'm joined by my buddy, David Riley, and we're talking chasing the unknown and the details that kill mature bucks. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're feeling fine. Happy Father's Day out there. Hopefully you guys were able to enjoy a nice weekend. Kind of crappy weather here, so no barbecuing. Going to kind of keep it chill and inside just kind of celebrate it with my girls. But hopefully you guys other places are getting some nice weather, can hang out outside, maybe a little barbecue, maybe a little beer by the fire pit, something along those lines to kind of wrap up your weekend. With that, we're just going to go ahead and jump into today's show. Have a cool show for you guys today. Got my buddy David Riley on from the Method podcast. And David's one of those guys that I've known about for a while. We have a handful of mutual friends. In particular, we talk about him at the beginning. But Mr. Greg Litzinger is really kind of who I think originally connected us. And David's a hell of a hunter in Michigan. And started in the last several years, really started to kind of travel hunt and kind of, explore areas outside his home state. And we talk a lot about, the differences between hunting, at home and, maybe some of the challenges with that, right? Or some of the ways we get in our own way with that, and how, we adapt when we are in places that are unfamiliar, and how that really kind of adds to our game to a degree. We also kind of talk about, maybe it's a product of getting a little older, but how when the hunt is kind of wrapped or whatever, how those feelings might be different now than maybe they were, 10, 15 years ago. And how much we appreciate those hunts and the process in general, as opposed to just that, the final moment of truth or the final encounter or whatever the case is. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. Today, I have on a buddy of mine. Actually, maybe a buddy might be a stretch because we just met each other. I don't want to go too far. You know what I mean? We're laying the foundation for buddy status, right? But
yeah. Hey, well, here's the thing, though, Clint, is like that's like you said, it could be a stretch because we just met. But when I think of like just outdoorsmen, whether it's hunting or fishing, we could run into each other anywhere in the Midwest and instantly be able to talk and conversate. Yeah. So the buddy thing, like I get it can be like thrown out loosely, but it's not a far stretch.
Right. Yeah. That, and you came from, so, I got David Riley on, David Riley Jr. from the Method podcast. So appreciate you coming on. So I've known of you for a while, right? Obviously, it's kind of followed you and been following you on social and stuff like that. but we have a mutual friend in Greg Litzinger,
Hmm.
right? Who we, are both good friends with. And he and I were just kind of chatting the one day, and I forget what we were even talking about. And he was like, "Hey, have you ever talked to David?" And I was like, "No." I was like, "I never have." He's like, "Man," he's like, "You should totally have him on." He's like, "You guys would get along. You guys would be able to chop it up." He's like, "You're birds of a feather. You totally
Yeah.
need to get him on." So anytime Greg tells me that, like, "Hey, you should talk to so and so," like his word is kind of gold for me because he's so much of a non BS person.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? So, but I appreciate you coming on, man. How are
Yeah.
things?
No, everything's good, man, and I appreciate you having me on. It's funny that you bring up Greg because Greg's one of those guys that is we live in a world now where I think it's very easy for the world to harp on social media, right? And rightfully so a lot of times. But man, I tell you what, Clint, I believe there's also a lot of good in it. And I've built so many relationships that have come through just social media itself where like how Greg and I's roads ever even crossed was, I when it comes to hunting, like I try to stay under the radar as much as could be for like a solid decade. And I got a buddy Aaron Blaise that runs the Fall podcast, and I had killed a really nice deer in 2021 in Michigan, and he was kind of on me. He wanted me to come on the podcast and tell the story of this deer. And I finally said okay. And, doing that podcast led to getting invited. Hey, do you want to go up to a total archery challenge with Aaron and a group of his buddies? I said, yeah, sure. And, then we're up at, Crystal Mountain in Michigan, would have been back in like 2022. And Greg was there. And, just like how we started this conversation about joking around about having a conversation about, becoming buddies. Dude, we were just on some back porch of some cabin on the side of a ski resort, and we were just cracking beers, and we got talking, and it was just like, someone said something about, someone was asking me a question, and I said something about the middle of October, and Greg's
Oh,
like,
that
well,
was it.
I like the middle of October too, and next thing you know, it was like, man, we've, since then we've actually crossed each other's roads a few times and shared some Airbnbs together. Never been on a hunt trip together, but we chat often, and I check in and see how his family's doing. And I was
Yeah.
the last I seen him was just out in Pennsylvania at the Harrisburg show, and got to spend some days out there with him. But I like Greg, but without social media, Greg's like a guy I'd never get to meet. So I try to
Yeah.
look at the positive side of social media when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, same thing here, man. It can do a lot of harm. It's brought me a lot of good.
Hmm.
Personally, same very similar situation. I would say a lot of the people who I'm actually really close with now, just consider close friends, I've probably met through hunting and social media in general. Because the same thing with Greg and I don't remember how I originally learned of him. Uh, I don't know. Somehow we got connected some way, somehow. I learned of him. Maybe I was following him for some reason or something like that. And I knew he was a really good archer, and that's kind of how
Hmm.
we met. And so we don't live far from one another, maybe like an hour and a half,
Oh,
roughly,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was a member at this 3D course, and I knew he was a really good archer. And I was like, hey, why don't you come up and we'll go do some shooting? We'll do a podcast. We'll hang out, do some shooting. And that was kind of how we became friends because I knew he was a really good archer.
Hmm.
And, I could certainly learn some things from him from an archery standpoint, and he helped me a ton with just like getting over target panic and stuff like that. And then, every year we make it a point to try to get together, with families and stuff like that. It's always hard, even though we live relatively close together. It's like trying to find the time whenever he's got time and I've got time. So we usually always make a point to, like, at one point right after the season, we try to get together at some point, like, February ish time frame. And then usually right before like the season kicks off, like sometime in August, he'll come up to my place or I'll go to his, and we'll, he'll tune my bow and we'll shoot and we'll do a podcast and just kind of chop it up and kind of get ready for the season. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's, as much as we like to think that it hurts things, and it does a fair job of that, but there's a lot of people that I've met and a lot of cool experiences I've got to have just
For sure.
through meeting those people, online. They're like, hey, you should check this place out. Or, hey, if you're ever passing through this state, like, just give you a heads up. Like, there's this area over in such and such county that like nobody goes to, you know what I mean? Just like people being cool with you,
Oh, yeah.
And so there's still some gems out there, right? And I think that's the moral of the story.
For sure. And I tell
Yeah.
you what, Greg's always been like the perfect example for me for this kind of situation is, 10 to 15 years ago, if I would have listened to anything about what Greg talked about with hunting, I probably would have been super close-minded just because I would have
Mm.
simply said, oh, he doesn't hunt the same kind of stuff I do. But then like, getting to talk to Greg and learn who he is, and then it's like the more you talk to someone, even though their situation may be totally different than yours when it comes to hunting, there's a lot more similarities with things, whether it's dates in the hunting season that fall into place. And even though he may hunt the salt marsh and I hunt a swamp, and we're actually like, yeah, well, guess what? Even in a salt marsh and a swamp, there's still edge in there somewhere. So,
Hmm.
but a younger me would have definitely like been super close-minded of listening to someone that may hunt something totally different. And Greg's always kind of that guy because he talks about where he hunts is a lot, it's probably
Hmm.
98% different than most every guy that listens to your podcast, where it's just totally different.
Yeah. I've learned a ton from him, and that was the one thing I think when we first kind of met that because when I moved to this area, I grew up in Pennsylvania, moved away for a
Mhm.
while, moved back, and then when I was away for a while, it's like I didn't really get to hunt much at all, and then kind of fell back in love with it whenever I moved back. But I had grown up on the western side of the state, so I was much more familiar with like hill country type of
Mhm.
hunting and more like agricultural, land type of hunting, right? Because
Yep.
there's a ton of ag, a lot of farms and stuff around where I grew up. And then I move out here where it's more suburban, right? And then even like the public there's a lot more kind of swamp area because it's like things that can't be developed,
Mhm.
right? So it's like the worst of the worst
Yeah.
kind of land, so to speak, right? And so I had never really hunted swamps growing up. And so that was a big learning curve for me. And it was a lot of just talking with him,
Mhm.
through like how he approaches it. And the thing was that, the thing that he would kind of point out to me is that, yes, it's different, but, a lot of what you're still looking for is similar, right?
Mhm.
It just might pop up in a different type of area,
Yep.
right? And so, because it probably took me like a solid like 2 years or so to kind of like no pun intended, but get my feet wet
Yeah.
in the swamps to try to figure out because it was just there was I had to think about vegetation and habitat in terms of terrain almost, right? Because
Mhm.
that was the thing that was going to move deer around as opposed to whenever I grew up in hill country, it was really obvious how deer were going to move or had to
Yeah.
move, right? And it just became a little bit more challenging to see that. And now it's, much easier, but that first kind of bit of learning curve was a lot of me talking to Greg going, I'm seeing this, like, where are the deer at? He's like, well, did you look over at this area? It's like, no, I didn't look there. He's like, well, that's where you need to look. So I would go
Yeah.
out and I would go look there. And he and I would scout together, like some, and I would, we would go to some areas and scout together because I just wanted to see. And I'm curious, like for you, like, how often you would do this, even because I even still find value in it now. Like I love going out with other people and just
Mhm.
walking, even if it's an area that I've hunted before and just watching how they see the woods because they might see it a little bit differently than me. And that was the one thing that, the details that Greg would pick up on was like a big thing that I picked up from him, and it changed a lot of like my quality of my hunts, I guess I should say, right? It was just like watching those details of like tick marks when you're walking through like a thick kind of swampy area. You may not find big rubs, but you'll find these little tick marks in certain areas. Or when I'm hunting an area that has like some frag, it's like, are they pulling reeds out? And are the reeds like 20 feet past like where the trail ends coming out of the
Mhm.
reeds? Like, and things like that where it's like I never would have thought of it. It's like, oh yeah, it got caught in the antlers and that's why that's there. So it was just like little things like that I picked up from him that made all the difference.
Yeah, well, dude, I would be probably in the exact same boat as you, Clint. I'm a very big like visual type learner. I guess you could say like seeing is believing,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, it's kind of funny that you bring this up because my wife and I were having this conversation this last off season where I'm like as of recently I'm kind of got more hooked onto like chasing the unknown, chasing something different, like something new nowadays. And you know in I scout a lot in the off season here in Michigan. Like that it's always been my game for the last 10 to 12 years, and I'll never stop doing that. But this last off season, I started thinking in my head like, what's next?
Mhm.
You know, I'm constantly trying to get new properties or look at new public land, but what's next? And I tell you, ever started like starting to do a podcast and talk to other guys, I have this big desire to like if I in a perfect world, if I had all the free time and money in the world, I think it'd be so fun to one trip a month, one 2 to 3 day trip a month with a different guy in a whole different area of the country. And listen, I don't want to go out there and hunt where you're hunting. I just want to tag along and see how you break things down. And like, so your example right there, I would love to go, go out to say where you're at or where Greg's at. And Greg, like, I've heard you talk about, the tide changing. Let's go out there and see the effects of the tide changing, like, so I could very well could see how, scouting with somebody in person like that could be so valuable. But to be honest, Clint, like I've maybe went scouting less than a handful of times with buddies, and that's usually like, scouting a piece that they're hunting, or, we're taking an out of state trip, say out to
Yeah.
Iowa, and we make an off season trip. Other than that, man, like the area where I come from in Michigan, it's pretty cutthroat. And like I said, like I try to stay under the radar as much as I ever could because it's just like I don't know, man. It's pretty
Yeah.
cutthroat around here.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying, man. I think, scouting with Greg was, well, let me back up. Similar boat to where there's only a handful of people that I've really scouted much with, right? One was Greg,
Mhm.
and it would be him visiting, and we would just be going out. And because Greg's just one of those guys, like you were saying, he likes to just go out, and because he's equally as interested to see, like, what am I looking at? What are my setups
Mhm.
look like? You know what I mean? Is there something he can pick up kind of along the way, right? I think all good hunters, at least in my opinion, that I've met, that was always kind of like their one quality that they all had was they were all always interested in learning, and they didn't care who they learned it from. Didn't matter if you were
Yep.
a brand new hunter, if there was something they could pick up from you, they were stoked to bend your ear and try to learn
Mhm.
what you think, right? Um, and then, my buddy Chad, is like we would go to Ohio together and stuff like that, and there was a big piece of public there that we would scout together, and primarily because it was just so big, it was that it would be more beneficial for us to kind of work in tandem and kind of
Mhm.
knowledge share to a degree. And then there's a place up north. I have a couple buddies that I've scouted and hunted that area with. Similar thing where it's tens of thousands of acres, and it's more to the benefit of the group to kind of pool resources. We even share camera intel, like, hey, is this deer on
Mhm.
your camera over here? Okay, cool, I got him over here, and just things like that to try to help make sense of that place a little bit more, because it's just so vast and so hard to hunt. But I will say, you have to have a special group of guys to be able to do that with. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just throw anybody
Oh,
into that
yeah,
group,
you're
or
you're
or
right.
or it could go sideways.
For sure. And what you were just speaking on is like, you go scout with somebody else and they're just as interested of how you see it. Like I always like refer to those people as like why people. Like and
Mm-hmm.
that's how I not that you have to that they're the quote unquote the serious guys, but the why people when it comes to hunting, like they're always wondering why or asking why maybe you think this. I love talking to guys like that because they're trying to learn just as much as you are. I've always thought like it you don't like take away anyone's age and how big like there's guys out there with giant walls that covered in big whitetails, but they're still like students of the game. And I think there's something to that because I truly believe, like I even think of myself, like I don't ever want to get complacent and think like I know everything about anywhere I go, because I truly believe, Clint, that if I ever were to think like that, like I think I'll stop killing shit because you're just get complacent. You're not like always trying to turn that next page and ask that next question. And even like when you're out there hunting alone and you see an animal do like you put this big plan together, right? That and all of a sudden that animal does something differently than what you expected, and you're just off. Well, you should be asking yourself, well, why do you do that? Because that's going to help you continue to learn, not only on that animal, but that next, that 2 and 3 animals after that too. So I can
Right.
see where scouting with guys like that would be very beneficial if you get the right guys. But what's interesting in your story, though, is, going to hill country to swamps, that's kind of like the opposite of what you hear most people do. Most people, it's like farmland and swamps, and then they travel to hill country and learn it like the opposite way.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I talked to some buddies of mine that are from Jersey, and one of them's actually he's moving to Ohio. And we were talking just about, not his plan, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, his plan for kind of getting out there and learning a new area and stuff like that. And just in my mind, I'm always like, hill country just always made a lot more sense to me and just seemed easier, and it's probably just because of familiarity, right? Because he's thinking the opposite. He's like, man, I don't know. He's like, I've got these swamps dialed, like on how to hunt these areas. He was like, now I'm going to go like with hills and, some mountain kind of areas. Like when you get into, southern parts of Ohio and stuff like that, the hills get a little bit bigger. He's like, and I'm just not sure. And I'm like, man, give yourself like a solid year of just doing it, and you'll see that like it starts to make a lot more sense. I was like the flat ground gives me a lot more problems than hilly ground does. I'll say that. Now, it's funny though, because in hill country, I think the thing that throws some guys off is that there's some of these really good rules to use to kind of start out, right? With the betting's going to be in a certain area, and the bucks are going to like to travel the top third, and like just like some very general kind of approaches, right, to get you pointed in the right direction. And I think a lot of times when people go to these areas, they treat that almost as the gospel, and they get there and they're like, well, the deer don't do that, and it's situationally dependent. Right? They don't always do that. Like I've been sitting plenty of times where I've watched a deer go straight up over a ridge where he's not running the top third. He's just literally going from the bottom straight to the top and going over. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. And so, yeah, that deer didn't do it, but do the rest of the deer, are they kind of following those rules or not? You just kind of have to observe it, right? And I think sometimes guys get frustrated by that the things that they've heard people repeat over and over again don't actually play out when they're hunting in those situations. And the reality is that those are really just loose rules, not even rules, loose guidelines to help you get started, and then let your eyes tell you what's actually happening. And I think that's part of the problem. They have to learn to trust their eyes, not just what they've heard, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I agree totally, Clint. And not only that is like, I also believe that, say like they're headed to hill country and all they've heard about is these benches. Okay, we'll use that as an example. And they marked a bench on the map. And now they have a destination in mind, and they'll blow right through good sign. Good stuff. Yeah. They'll blow right through good sign because they have a destination in mind where it's like, dude, you are so green at this where it's like, don't overlook the good sign just because you have a destination in mind. And listen, I'm saying it because I've been guilty of that before. Like 100%. I like my lessons are learned the hard way. And I'll tell you what, like when you go into like foreign territory, for me, a lot of times, Clint, it's just like, if I can get some visual on deer, whether I need to bump them up or I get a visual on them from a tree, I let the deer tell me kind of how they want to traverse the ground, and one of the deer I killed this last year was that exact scenario. I'd never hunted ground like that. And all I needed to do is see some deer traverse it in a certain way to be like, okay, this is how they want to do it. The sign said this, and now they're showing me this. Like, let's just use that. Like, it's seen as believing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a vital part of it, is just that visual intel, right? That you can use. It's so important. And it can be frustrating if you don't have that and you think you're doing the right things and you're not seeing the deer or whatever the case is. And like, same as you have been guilty of walking by great sign, setting up, and like while I'm set up going, yeah, I probably should have stopped about a mile back, where the real good sign was at, been there, done that. And I think that just takes a certain amount of time. I think especially whenever you're in a new area. I know for me, it was hard when I was in Iowa, most specifically, right? Destination spot. People would love to go hunt, right? Got a tag. And when you get to some of those great destination kind of areas, or just states that have really good bucks, you have to almost recalibrate your brain of like what good sign is, right? And when you first get there, you're walking by stuff because you think, well, that looks good, but like, man, I'm in the Mecca. There should be a rub the size of my torso out here somewhere, and you're looking for this stuff that's like still one in a million kind of, right?
Yeah.
But you've tricked yourself a little bit into thinking that it's the sign is going to be, more than it maybe is, right? And I think that's the hard part when you're traveling to new areas. I always try to. Sometimes I don't get a chance to scout the places that when I travel to hunt, most of the time I don't get to. It's like I show up and I just start.
Yep.
But I usually always have a buddy and I'm curious like what your approach is for this, but I usually always have a buddy that lives like in the general area that I can usually talk to and get a sense of like, hey, when I'm looking for, rubs, tracks, scrapes, whatever, like what for you constitutes good, right? Like what are you looking for? And then I kind of have that in my mind whenever I'm walking to, certainly pick out a destination. I want to check this out. But if I'm seeing stuff along the way and it's matching up with what they've told me, now I stop.
Yep.
Right. And so it's getting that context. That way you don't have to make the mistake. I only learned that by making that mistake multiple times.
Yeah.
And I finally figured out, to be like, hey, I should probably talk to somebody who lives here,
Yeah. Well, you know what I'll do, Clint, is before I'm traveling, and a lot of times if I'm traveling, it'll be new because I only really started travel hunting here in 2020. Basically, once my girls started getting old enough, more self-sufficient, where it's like, okay, it's okay if I hit the road for 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, whatever it may be. But dude, I will hit every search engine I can, and that includes like podcasts and stuff, and I'll just put in keywords, Illinois hills or Kansas straws, or I'm just looking for anything. And honestly, I don't even care how old the content is. I'll listen to it because there's some really good stuff out there. Because I come from like the old school, like the hunting beast forums, the Next Buck Outdoor forums, where like if I read a story on there, a lot of times, 10, 12 years ago, if someone killed a buck, you're going to get the story and then you're going to get a map of the exact spot. And I'm such a visual learner where like I would study that. But now with, I guess we're kind of circling back to the social media part is I will lean on, some people that may live out in that area of the country, just ask me like, hey, what do you see for dates? I'm not looking for spots or anything, but like, what are I don't know, what are some train features that you see during the second week of October favorable for, big mature whitetails and just things like that. Cause that's kind of what my out-of-state hunting has turned into, is just dropping in and hunting. Like the only state that I've ever went out and pre-scouted before I went there was in 2020, and that was Iowa. Outside of that, like since then, Kansas, Nebraska, Illinois, it's simply showing up and lacing up the boots and trying to figure it out and hunting. Like that's it. That's kind of it. It's not even kind of, that is my game now for out of state hunting. And what's wild though, Clint, is like I've talked to some guys about this because I try to wrap my head around it, because it's the complete opposite of what I do in Michigan. Like I in Michigan, I feel like I gotta, I gotta know everything, right? I gotta have a pulse on everything that's going around to be able to get one killed. But I go out of state and kill them, but in a completely different fashion. And a lot of times I can't help but wonder, this is one thing that it always sticks in my mind, is if you're out of state hunting, in Michigan here where I come from, I can be wrong on the first 10 days and still have the whole rest of the season. I can't be wrong for 10 days out of state, like, cause I'll be back home by the end of it, where, not. And listen, I'm really good at making arguments for both sides, like postseason scouting and in season scouting. But the one thing that I have noticed, what I do when I'm just drop in hunting, I am not married to anything before I get there. Now I'll have a few spots on the map picked out, right? And I'll honestly, I know you had him on your podcast. Is I kind of take, I hope I say his name right, is Daniel Lemon's approach. Am I saying it? Where he's, he'll pick 2 or 3 spots. That's the only pins he needs, and they're not not exact spot to where he's going to hunt, but spots he wants to check out. And that's kind of what I do. I'll just drop in 2 or 3 spots, get in there, check them out, feel them out. What one feels better in the gut to me than the other ones, because I'm not married to something I seen in January out there in Missouri that I'm going back for 10 days going, I got to go back that spot. And here's the thing, that spot that you've seen in January that you got married to, I'm not saying it's a bad spot. It only may be a bad spot for the 10 days that you happen to be there. You know what I mean? Right. So that's a thing where it's like I'm just kind of reading the here and now and going with my gut.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that's pretty much exactly how I approach it anymore. I almost prefer, I'm curious how you feel about it, because similar to you, where in Pennsylvania, I almost feel like I don't want to say have, oh yeah, I'll say it this way. I have too much information, or I feel like I have too much information to where I start kind of over analyzing things a little bit and trying to thread the needle just a little too finely,
Hmm.
where whenever I'm traveling and I'm not scouting the area that I'm going to, it's to your point, I'm not married to anything and I'm literally just learning things in real time and going, right? And this year was an interesting year for me, and the postseason scouting was very limited this year. And I almost feel like if I can pull it off, I kind of want to continue to hunt this way, because last year I hunted a ton in PA because I was after a big deer,
Hmm.
and I was working and hunting from my trailer so I could stay where I was hunting and work from that, and hunt in the mornings, hunt the evenings, and like work the middle of the day. So I was basically in the woods every day, like chasing that deer. And when it came to time for like postseason scouting, there was one or two new areas I wanted to check out. Some family stuff kind of happened, got in the way, and so there was really only one area I got to explore that I wanted to look at. But there wasn't really a need for me to go do a bunch of postseason scouting, because I was like, all the sign that's been laid, I saw it all,
Hmm.
because I was there every day, basically from October 5th to like November 17th.
Yep.
You know, I was in the woods, like I think in that span I hunted like 30 couple days within like 45 days or whatever. I was like, so there's nothing that's there that I haven't seen. You know,
Yeah.
I can tell you where every scrape's at. I can tell you where every rub's at in there, that area. And so, in my mind, I was like, man, I almost prefer, if I can pull it off, I want to continue to hunt that way, because I was able to stay on deer every day. And then whenever it came to postseason, when I do have more free time, I can actually now go look at more spots and spend more time in those newer areas, because I don't
Hmm.
have to backtrack to the places that I've already hunted, because I spent the entire season there, if that makes
Yep.
sense. And
No.
then when I go out of state, I just like to drop in, because to me, I feel really like free, and that I'm able to kind of do my best kind of thinking and best hunting, because I'm literally hunting. Because this new saying that I kind of picked up from this jujitsu guy was that jujitsu is what happens between the techniques. And so I kind
Hmm.
of adopted it and was like, hunting's actually what happens between the sits.
Hmm.
And so I'm trying to live into that idea as much as I possibly can. And I feel like when I go out of state, I do a good job of it. And I feel like when I'm at home, I don't do as good a job as I could. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
no, no, it does, dude. And like I said, it's something that I've been trying to wrap my head around, because it is like, to me, when I write it, if I wrote it all down on paper, it looks like two totally different books. You know, how to
Mm-hmm.
approach whitetails this way and how to approach whitetails this way. It looks totally different. Now, I like that I am able to, have those encounters and find some success in two totally different fashions, because it does make me well-rounded. But it
Mm-hmm.
also I can't help but wonder, what if I took that a little bit of out of state approach and brought that back to my home state?
Yeah.
And maybe not on pieces that I'm already hunting. What if I take that approach on a new piece in Michigan, and just, because I already have these places I've been hunting for, a long time here in Michigan. I have
Right.
those in the Rolodex. Those are in the back pocket. I know when those are going to be good. Now I'll spot check them right in the off
Mm-hmm.
season, to you see what, maybe there's a blowdown or swamp levels. I'm always going to just keep a good grip on everything out there. But I I don't know. It's something about it where it's got me. I'm getting hooked. I can tell you that, where it's like it's something different. But it's also the unknown too, right? So
Yes.
like, and I like knowing what bucks around Michigan. Like I love going out there and glassing them in the summertime and getting
Mm-hmm.
good pictures of them on scrapes. I love all of that. But there's also something like, it's almost like a good mixture maybe now too. I like that I have both worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not putting myself into a corner of one. But Clint, I want to ask you something, and I hope
Yeah.
I don't take us down too much of a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I always think about this, because I've heard you talk about the deer that you chased this last year, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to ask you this, because I'm a strong believer in, the say, if there's one deer you don't kill, and we're going to use the deer that you chase this last season, I think there'll be 2 to 3 to 4 bucks that end up dead because of the one you didn't kill. What is one thing that you're going to keep in your back pocket after chasing this deer this last season, that you feel like, dude,
Mm-hmm.
this is going in my back pocket for the next decade of my hunting?
Yeah, man. I think for me, it was two things really, that deer taught me a good lesson. And that was, one was the devil's in the details with like chasing him, especially like, he was at least 6.5, maybe 7.5, was where I aged him at, just based on how long I knew of him. And he was a ghost for the most part, right? Like you just didn't see him a whole lot. Like he would show up on trail camera, like at certain parts of the season, and you knew he was around, but he wasn't real, like super consistent or anything like that. Like he didn't leave a lot of sign, and that was pretty typical. Like I think, for big bucks in general. But it was just once I figured out I tried to cut a track. I couldn't cut his track because it was like everything was super grassy, kind of like where he was living. So there wasn't a lot of bare dirt for him to walk through. But once I cut his rub mark, once I figured out what that was, it was a unique kind of like fingerprint that then I knew where he was at. And that was kind of what I used to track him, was basically how a certain kind of mark he would leave when he would make a rub. Right. So that was a big thing for me, was that I learned that I was not nearly as detail oriented in my approach as I thought I was until I chased that deer, because I could not figure him out for the life of me until I went down the rabbit hole of like looking at every freaking rub that I walked by, and not just looking at it, but like examining it. You know what I mean? So it taught me that, in order to chase those, a deer of that maturity, you really have to pay attention to the details, because they're not going to make many mistakes and they're not going to leave a whole lot of sign for you. And then the second one was that how killing a deer that's of that maturity, or just being on them and having encounters with them, is probably less about patterning them. And the patterning part of it for me was more in hindsight, and I didn't really figure this out until like after the season, was what allowed me to be in his area. But the one encounter that I had with him was whenever I started thinking about his personality and less about his moves, right? And kind of thinking about what he's thinking or what he's trying to do. I don't want to say I ever can think about what a deer's thinking about, but understanding his kind of like personality is what kind of helped me put me in the right spot to have the encounter, right? And so that was the thing that I think will help me going forward for the next decade, is like use the patterning to understand where they want to be and what times of year they want to kind of be in general areas. But I'm probably not going to kill that deer until I really understand him from a personality standpoint, because that's the thing that's going to allow me to be predictive and get in front of him. Because when you're just looking at the sign and looking at his patterns and stuff like that, you're always probably going to be a day behind unless you get lucky, right? And so to get in front of them, I think you have to kind of know them, not just know what they like to do, but actually know the deer.
Yep. I think the part you bring up about the personality part, I think that's like one of the biggest keys when a guy's devoting an entire season to one deer. Like you really got to know that personality thing. But I love that you brought up the small details thing, because I've always like I can remember, someone that I looked up to a long time ago used to tell me, is like the smallest details will kill the biggest animals. And I always thought about that. And I'll tell you what, I just had a discussion with a guy last month, and I brought up that quote, and he said, you know what? He said this, Clint. He said, the deadliest details are the easiest details to miss, though, also. And I was like, dude, it's so right. Because, if you take in the factor of, the smallest details are the deadliest, but the deadliest are the easiest ones to miss also, where it's like, man, it's the devil's in the details, right? I guess in the whitetail world. But I love that you brought that up, because I'm a believer in that, Clint. As much as that probably stung and that will, sit with you forever. It's going to be very easy to watch, the next 2 or 3 bucks end up on the wall. Like they're going to die because of the small details that are being paid attention to now.
Yeah, 100%. I was having this similar conversation with a buddy of mine, and and my takeaway was that I think a lot of people, you'll hear them talk about the details, and they'll talk about being detail oriented and paying attention to the details and stuff like that. But I don't think until one of them really teaches you that lesson, you don't get it, right? You think you're detail oriented until like you keep being a step behind and missing your goal because you're just not paying enough attention, right? And that's what became really, really obvious to me, was like, I think that, I think it's with anything in life, whether it's hunting, whether it's playing baseball, playing jiu-jitsu, like the difference between like people who are really, really good at something and like great, it's not that they have this supernatural gift. some people, yes, but like most people know, it's their ability to execute the details consistently, right? You take a guy like an Andy May, right? It's like he'd be the first one to tell you, like, and I've heard him say it, like, I'm not special, right? And like, and you, when you hear someone like that say something like that, you're like, oh, come on, dude. Like, you go on a 3-day trip somewhere and kill a monster. You know what I mean? But whenever you really understand what he's saying is that, I'm not doing anything special. I'm just paying attention to the details, and I've got things dialed in. And when I go to execute, it's consistent, right? That's really what he does, right? That's what he does better than anybody I've ever known, And so, someone can get there, but it just takes a lot of dedication and a lot of focus, really. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, you got to have just an insane amount of focus to be able to do that on a consistent basis.
No, I agree there, because I've been fortunate enough to have some really good conversations with Andy, and I've got to meet him a few times, and him and I always kind of get to the same topic, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand it about him, is that he brings it up a lot, is that, he has a lot more encounters than, say, his entire friend group does in a year, but he'll also tell you he screws up a lot more than his friends also do in that same year.
Yeah.
But when you look at that body of work, like I'm pretty convinced that a lot of these encounters say that us guys mess up. Those are where we're learning. That's where those next 2 or 3 bucks end up on the wall from, is when we make a mistake. And
Yes.
when you hear Andy say that, where he says, yeah, he's like, I mess up a lot, and it's not necessarily the shot. It's just the situation of how the deer is, and maybe
How you read the situation, how you
yes.
read the deer, how you approach the hunt. Like, exactly. Because there's a multitude of ways to mess it up. It doesn't just mean the shot, right? And I think a lot of guys think of that like, you mess up a lot of hunts before the hunts even start, like with access, like, for example, right? I think the hard part is that, people don't like to examine their flaws, right? They all, like, it's hard, I think, for some people to do that. And I think unless you've done things maybe outside of hunting, that the only way you were ever going to get better at it was to examine what you weren't good at and to fill that hole. I think hunting's it's one of those hard things to do, where I think for a lot of guys, because it's like they go out on a Saturday or whatever, and then it's like another week till they go out, and it's, so it's not as consistent. It makes it harder, right? Because you don't have that next day to kind of go fix it. Like, a great example is like training jiu-jitsu. I train multiple times a week. So it's like, if there's something I see on a Tuesday, I'll address it on Wednesday, or I'll address it on Thursday, right? Hunting's not necessarily the same way. It's like, it's a longer sales cycle, if you will, right? And so it requires a little bit more discipline, because you have to mentally kind of like have that written down, and you got to be able to go back to it and know what the thing is that you need to fix, And so I think it's harder to do, but I think it's the same process.
Yep. And you brought up that thing about having a hard time looking at your flaws, and I think that's a very big thing with people, and especially with hunting. Like, it's easy to stand on the box where you find success with hunting, but every one of us has a weakness in our game somewhere. And I have a tendency, if I know I'm weak here,
I was just going to ask you, what's your weakness? We should go into this, because this is good.
Yeah. So I know, like, I'll circle back to my current one right now, like what I feel like my weakness is. But like, I know 5 years ago, Clint, if you asked me, what are you extremely weak at when it comes to hunting, and I would have immediately said e-scouting. That's the first thing I would say. But it wasn't e-scouting where I hunt. It's e-scouting with other places I hunt, because I was like, I could tear apart any swamp for you any day of the week. Like, and we could, get right into there, get an encounter, maybe get an animal killed. That wasn't an issue. It was when I looked outside of my comfort zone. And well before I started even travel hunting, I knew that was my weakness, and I would pour over maps nonstop and take a screenshot and maybe send it to someone and say, "Hey, am I on the right track here? Like, I'm not going to hunt this, but I'm just trying to, like, would you hunt this spot on October 20th or no? Or am I just off? Am I thinking about it wrong? Would you hunt it with this wind or this wind?" Or like that was a huge that was a huge weakness of mine. And still, honestly, I would still say that's probably a little bit of a weakness of mine, but is the e-scouting place. And that's why, like, we just talked about the how Daniel Lemon, like, kind of just does it 2 or 3 pins where I found like that works really well for me. And, because otherwise I'll take we'll just call it a square section, a square mile. 10 years ago, that thing would have had 43 freaking pins all over that thing. And now I'll have one because I just want to go in there and
Right.
check it out and let my boots just do the work, but the e-scouting was a huge weakness in my game, at least in my opinion, it was.
hmm Yeah, that's interesting. Like I think for me, if you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I think I would have said hunting similar to you. It would have been hunting in e-scouting swamps,
Hmm.
like or just flat ground in general. Like I really struggled with that for quite a few years. I didn't really get the monkey off my back till like 3 years ago.
Hmm.
Just like it took me that long to like figure it out. I got to the point where I was having encounters and things like that, but it was like I was just not getting the shot opportunity because I wasn't set up quite right. It was just there wasn't a hard edge for me to really use. Like, and so it was just all a little bit foreign to me, and it took me a little bit of time. But similar to you, it's like I would have conversations with Greg about it, right? I would go scout with Greg, and we would look at spots together, and I would see how he looked at things. I would see sometimes it'd be an area that I wasn't even going to hunt that we were just walking through, and I'd say, hey, if you're going to hunt here, what tree would you pick?
Hmm.
And he'd be like, because that another weak spot of mine was actually picking the right absolute tree. I could always get to the right area.
Hmm.
But picking the kill tree was like a spot that I wasn't super strong at, right?
Yep.
And so I would ask him what tree he would hunt, and he would always say to me, he's like, "You tell me which tree first." You know what I mean? That way,
Yeah.
I had to. He was doing a good job coaching, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd be like, this tree. He's like, I would hunt that one. You know what I mean? I'd be like, why? He's like, that tree's okay. That'll be decent. It could work. He's like, but here's why I would pick this tree.
Hmm.
And then it was things like that. And then I think for me later it became hunting off the ground because, like you were saying, wanting to be well rounded.
Hmm.
I didn't want to miss opportunities because I didn't have the skill set to hunt the right tactic, right? And so
Hmm.
then I just started. To your point before, it's like I just started putting myself in those bad spots, right? Like put myself in the tough situations to learn by baptism by fire, which was just like, I'm going to hunt off the ground a bunch in some areas that I could only hunt off the ground, and we're going to try to figure it out,
Yep.
and
Yep.
let the animals kind of teach me some lessons,
Yeah.
and that was really what happened. It was 3 trips to Kansas before I figured it out.
Yeah. It's very easy. I mean, we're humans. I think it's very easy for most people to like find where they get success from and just stay on that route. But listen, if that's what you want to do, have at it. That's fine. I just like, that's just me, my personality though. Like if I know there's a weakness in there, I want to see if I can't fix it and learn from it. And like, I like, this is nothing groundbreaking, and it's probably honestly maybe stupid for the listeners, but when I've gone out of state, I've hunted states that I don't need rubber boots anymore compared to the swamps I do in Michigan. But I'm having good success. I'm having encounters. I'm killing some deer, and it makes me think. I'm like, I've been so focused on putting the rubber boots on in Michigan. Like, I wonder if I'm missing out on some other areas in Michigan just because I'm so focused on the water. Where like in the last 2 years, I've purposely, if I go out, say a day of scouting, I'll leave the rubber boots at home and force myself to go scout something that I'm not usually scouting, just trying to maybe uncover something different because now my eyes are more open to other opportunities.
Man, I love that, dude, because I think a lot of times people think of, usually when you hear someone talk about limitations, they immediately think of reducing your options,
Hmm.
right? But I think sometimes when you have a limitation, it's the thing that can expand your opportunities the most because you have to start to think about things differently. And I love that approach because you just literally forced yourself into an area, right?
Hmm.
I think this sometimes happens. A great example was it happened to me in grappling. I messed up my shoulder and I was going to take some time off, right? And my coach just said, just train with one arm.
Hmm.
And I looked at him, I was like, man, you crazy? Like, I'm already getting killed. Like, what do you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do it with one arm now. He was like, Yeah. He's like, just do it with one arm. He was like, and then whenever you get both back, he's like, just think how much better you'll be when you can use both arms.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it sounds crazy, and it is a little crazy, right? But that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be damned if he wasn't right. You know what I mean? So that limitation actually made a lot of other parts of my game way stronger because I had to adapt and
Mm-hmm.
figure out a different way to do it. And I think hunting's a lot the same. Going back to what you said earlier, which was like, staying engaged and looking for new spots, and not necessarily always hunting the same areas that people often kind of like think about the successes that they've had in the past and let that kind of predict or dictate how they're going to approach their next hunt, right? As opposed to like thinking outside of that and seeing like what you were saying, like what else is out there, like what's excited about the freedom and like not being tied to like a known area. Like to me, that's where the excitement comes from. And you had mentioned about staying engaged or excited or something like that. And I wrote down because I wanted to ask you, like, how do you keep that excitement? Because like you were saying, like you don't want this to ever get boring for you, right? You want to kind of always see something new, what's over the next horizon or whatever the case is. Like, how do you keep hunting exciting for you?
Well, that's a really good question, man. I've first off, I've never even heard anyone ask someone else that question, so I like the question a
The
lot.
reason why I ask is because we're both in the 40 club,
Mm-hmm.
right? We've done a lot of hunting, right? We have families, priorities, obligations, things like that, right? And sometimes it can, as much as we love it, it can sometimes, I'll be the first to admit, you can sometimes get to a point of burnout. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And and I'm always curious for people what they do to try to keep that like like learning and staying engaged and wanting to kind of tackle like the next thing, and and what that is for a person.
Yeah, for me, right. There's honestly two things, and one is just kind of as recent. We've been talking about the travel hunting a little bit. That's definitely fueled a different fire inside me right now, and it's not just because I'm going to other places that probably have better deer than what my home state of Michigan is. It's the unknown. I don't know what lives there. I don't know what we're going to get into. I don't know what's going to when that sound comes up and I hear something behind me, I don't know what that is. So I
Mm-hmm.
really love like I'm really loving that a lot right now. Like I'm enjoying that a lot. But I think for me, Clint, honestly what keeps me so engaged is if you told me this, if you said, "Okay, David, all you get to do is hunt from October 1 through January 1. There's no other things that you get to do other than hunt." I may not like it then.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I may not like it because I love the process of things and like I love packing, I love planning, I love getting the meals ready to go out on a trip. And growing up, not to get too sidetracked, but like growing up, I never played any sports, but I raced motocross at a high level my whole entire life. But guess what? I loved getting the bikes ready to go to leave for the week. I loved packing the toy haulers and getting the trailers hooked up. I loved the traveling. I loved the whole concept of it, so like right now, like we mentioned about a little bit earlier that I love summer glassing. Honestly, like when it comes to my home state, I probably love summer, the velvet part of whitetails more than hunting itself. Like, so if you said,
Yeah.
listen, you only get to do hunting season and that's it, I'm not saying I wouldn't do it, but it would not mean as much to me because,
Mm-hmm.
that's how it was for, I started hunting at 12 and I never got into wanting to kill big deer until I was about 28 years old. So that whole span of my life, that was just, oh, hunting season here. Let's shoot the bow a little bit the month before and then we'll go hunting. And there's nothing
Right.
wrong with that too if someone wants it. Just for my personality, I love the process of all of it, the adventure part of it, everything that's involved. I love all like as much as people don't like it. Like I like looking for the next Airbnb to stay at, and what town am I going to be in? Oh shit, I better find it. Is there a taxidermist nearby? Is there a processor? I love all of that shit. So
Yeah.
I think that's what really keeps me driven is being able to kind of tinker with, planning hunts and trying to locate big deer kind of year round, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
Clint.
Yeah, man, that speaks a lot to me, man, because the I feel like the most of just speaking for me personally, like most of my life is somewhat like I'm a very regimented person. Like
Hmm.
I like to do things the same times, the same days, whether it's scouting, working out, doing a podcast, whatever. I try to keep things kind of organized, right?
Yep.
And I'm similar to where it's like I like the process. Like even when I go out in the summer and I open my travel trailer up to get something out of it, and and that smell hits me, and I'm like, oh
Hmm.
man, hunting season, like
Yep.
hunting. You know what I mean? It's
Yep.
like I start to
Yeah.
get butterflies in my stomach, and and just start to get fired up. But I think for me, part of the excitement is that adventure kind of component of it, because my wife always makes fun of me because we go somewhere. I couldn't tell you the name of the streets around my house, and we've
Hmm.
lived here for a long time, right? No clue what any of the roads are, like nothing. Like we go to she'd be like, "Hey, you got to go to the dentist tomorrow." Like, all right, where's that at again? I'm like, I don't remember. Like I go every 6 months, but I don't know where the dentist is at. You
Can
know
you
what I
can
mean?
you can you print out MapQuest for me real quick?
Yeah, MapQuest, dude, the old school there, yeah, for sure. But she's like, how in the world do you travel to the Midwest, dragging your trailer along with you to like God knows where, right? Hop into the woods somewhere, meander around, kill a deer, get it to a taxidermist. She's like, and I can't get you to go to the grocery store and know where it's at.
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't know. I was
Yep.
like, but I was like, the other stuff just seems like a lot of fun, you know?
Yep. Yeah, no,
You
I
know?
mean, like, I'll tell you, it goes as deep as this, where it's like, say I'm headed out of state November 15th, and I'm still hunting here in Michigan, where, I should be hunting right up to the day I leave if I
Mhm.
have a tag, but I'll be like a week out. I'm like, man, I got my shit all laid out, ready to
Yeah.
go, like, everything's good to go. Or it's like, but I'm trying to battle, like, do I keep hunting, or am I getting ready for the trip? But because
Yeah.
even outside of hunting, like my family and I, we love to travel, so maybe
Mhm.
that's just we're always chasing that next adventure. And
Mhm.
it's when I brought up like how I raced motocross is, yeah, you have like a team surrounded by you, but when I would put that leg over that bike, it was myself and myself only, and that's hunting though still too.
Mhm.
Like I'm not surprised that I picked still like a solo sport, right after getting older, and I ended up having to get on motocross because I got in a really bad accident,
Oh man.
right out of high school, and then I
Right.
just kind of jumped right into that next hobby. And but that's me though. It's gonna be 100 or nothing, and my wife
Yeah.
always talks about it. She's like, you gotta watch your hobbies because I just know how that goes. It's gonna be if we're gonna, whatever. If we're gonna get into skydiving, like I want to be the best skydiver I could be, and that's the
Right.
same thing with hunting. And I think that's probably why I enjoy that year round process of
Mhm.
just being able to be engaged with it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I like I enjoy spending time with some buddies. Hunting for sure. If it's like a trip somewhere or something like that. But it's usually very specific. Like there's only like a handful of people I can really truly
Hmm.
do that with, right? Because you have to have the right person. That's why usually if I'm traveling somewhere, it's often with my buddy Chad because we're very similar type of people. We're both when I go on a trip, it's I'm regimented just like I am with anything else. I'm up early, I hunt hard, I come home, I eat, I get my stuff ready, and I get in bed. Like
Yep.
there's no, it might not sound like fun to some people. I was like, but there's no like, having 4 beers before I go to bed. There's none of that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's like I'm like on a I don't want to say I'm on a mission because I'm not sucking the fun out of it, but for me, like getting up early, doing the thing I want to do, like and going through that process every day, like that's fun, you
Yep.
know. And and it's for me, I've always kind of enjoyed solo sports.
Hmm.
Wrestling. That was like my favorite sport growing up. That's what I liked to do, and I still do it. And it's like because it's all kind of it's all on you.
Yep.
It's you versus not so much the animal or whatever, but most of the time it's more you versus you. Am I a better version of the hunter? Am I a better version of the hunter? I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Am I a better hunter today than I was yesterday?
Yep.
Because
There you go.
that's really my only goal going
Hmm.
out. Right? Yeah,
Yep.
I want to fill a tag, right? But if I continue to do that every day, every year, every 5 years, I'm going to fill more and more tags as I go, and more the type of tags that I want to fill, right? And so I think for me, that's why like the solo endeavors speak to me more because it's always me versus me, and it's
Hmm.
never really me versus the other thing because the other thing's a moving target. The only thing that's not a moving target is my development, and that's what I'm focused on.
Yeah. And say when it all comes together in the fall, and you're standing over an animal that you killed, whether it's an elk or mule deer or deer, whatever the case may be. Like, I can't help but think about everything it took to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot with everything, right? Like, you know, what if you're big into NASCAR, and I can't help but think when whoever wins, say the Daytona 500, what that, they don't, yeah, you're taking in that moment, but everything it took to get to that, that's what I love right there. And
Hmm.
that can be found in so many things, whether it's a national championship in college at whatever sport, or I even get as deep into it. Like I try to explain that a lot to my girls, like we just come to the end of the school year. Think about day one when you went
Yeah.
to
How
school.
much?
Like,
Yeah.
it was an entire process, what you went through, and now we're here at the end, and then it's gonna happen again next year. I think like that a lot. Or is I'll tell you honestly, Clint, is as much as like, you know, as happy as I am and excited in the moment when I kill an animal, I'm almost more bummed that it's come to an end, because it's
Yeah.
like I'm bummed that it's come to an end. But on the, like I said, I'm really good at always looking at the flip side of things. But on the flip side of that, then I think, okay, we get to restart again, and now we get to
Mhm.
do this all over again, and all that planning and the pursuit, all of it we get to wipe the slate clean and start from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. I can totally kind of get with that. The idea of when it kind of comes to a close, there's obviously excitement, but there is certainly for me too. There's a little part of me that's bummed out because you just want to relive that, that successful process, right? Because it's so fleeting,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all the work that goes into it. And I think it's partially what I enjoy about it. Like I enjoy celebrating those highs with buddies for sure. Like the drag out and stuff like that. Like love doing that as a group. But I always do like to have like a little bit of alone time just to kind of go through my mind of like what it took. You know what I mean? Just like to go back and be like, you had to do this and this screwed up and this screwed up. And here's all the reasons why it shouldn't have worked, or why it, might not have, or why it didn't in the past. And these are the things that you corrected. You know, and you kind of get to soak in that sense of accomplishment a little bit.
Oh
Right.
yeah, that
Um,
that that moment right there, Clint. That this the older I get, the more I try to make sure I take that time for those moments after I kill an animal. And a lot of times, say if it's in my home state, that's probably the best example. Is, take the extra time nowadays and maybe get some better pictures. Enjoy that moment where that animal
yes.
lays, because it's very easy. I've been so guilty of this in the past. Recover the animal because it's a Wednesday night. Kids got school the next morning because the girls always want to go out there tracking. We're trying to get them back and get it gutted. Let's get it processed, all that. We're now, over the last probably 6 or 8 years, I make it a point to do this as I get that animal home, did everything I wanted to do out in the woods or the swamp with that animal. Get that animal home, get it hung up in the garage. The buddies come over, dad and grandpa, they come over. The wife and daughters, they're out in the garage. But then there's going to be a point that everyone leaves the driveway. And then the wife and girls are like, okay, I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed and go get a shower. And they all go inside. And then there's just quietness, and there's
Yeah.
that animal that's hanging. Most of the time it's hanging in the garage. Maybe once in a while it'll be in the back of the truck still. And then I'll just sit there and just that moment, like, just quietness. And I'm not thinking about what the animal looks like right there. I'm thinking about what it took to get to that
What it
animal.
took.
that
Yes.
that like that's heavy on me. That means the world to me, because if you took away that feeling from me, that right there, you asked the question about like what keeps me like motivated. If you took that feeling away from me, I don't know if I'd want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would. It would be I that would be a hard decision right there.
Yeah. Man, I love that because the that gratitude moment is, I think for me, especially as I've gotten older, has become more and more
Hmm.
important. Right. And to your point, it's like often it's like I'll kill a deer and it's in the evening and I'm like, oh, same thing. It's like, oh, I got to find him. Like I'm going to lose light. Let's get out of here before it gets too dark. Like, I don't want to have to be stumbling over logs and whatever, right, to get out of here. And you kind of rush through it. And, there was an area that I had hunted for a couple years and I finally killed a deer in there. what it was, I think 2 years ago, and I wanted to kayak a buck out of this area, right?
Hmm.
And so shot him first thing in the morning, right? It was October 16th. Shot him
Okay.
first thing in the morning, and I was so grateful that I shot him in the morning because I remember I heard him fall and I got down and I went and found him. And I remember as soon as I found him, I sat down and I just said, "Man, I'm so grateful I shot this thing at like 20 after 7." I was like, "Because I've got the entire day
Hmm.
to just soak it in." You know what I mean? So I took my time getting him out of there, got some pictures, the whole nine, got him in my truck, kayaked him out, got him back to the house, got him strung up in the garage, cracked a beer, had a cigar. You know what I mean? Like I was
Oh
like, I'm
yeah.
gonna soak this thing in, man. It took me like 3 seasons of like getting beat by multiple bucks in this spot, so I finally got it right. And I
Yep.
was like, I'm just gonna soak this whole thing in. Wife and kid, my wife and my daughter were at work and school, so it was just me and the dog at the house. So I'm having a cigar, drinking a beer, and I was like, man, it couldn't get any better. You know
Yep.
what I mean? I was like, and so that was actually when I think back on it, killing the deer was great, but my memory of that hunt is actually kayaking that buck out and actually having a cigar and a beer while I have him hanging in my garage. Like
Yep.
that's actually what I think about.
Well, I'm going to hit on this is during your story. This is what I picked up. One, we never talked about how many points he had or what he even scored. Okay, but it's more than just the kayak part of it or the canoe, whatever you did there, Clint. It's you remembered that your wife and your kids weren't home. Like you remembered all of those little details, and that's where like when guys are engulfed in the process of it, what's the first thing you said after you sat there and had that beer and cigar? You thought about how it took 3 years to get in there and kill a deer. Like when that stuff weighs on you, that's when it's like it just means more. It means
Yeah.
more when you pour everything into it, in my opinion. Where it's
So,
like we didn't talk about how I didn't ask you how big he was. You didn't
mhm.
say, yeah, I shot this. He was a 9 point or whatever he was. Like none of that was said. What was
Yep.
said is the memory, the things that the fine details, and you, like you said, you even made the remark, yeah, my wife and daughter they weren't home. There's just me and the dog, and I'm drinking a cigar, and you could probably remember what beer you had that day and
Oh,
everything.
I had a Jenny Heavy is what I had.
Yeah.
That is what I had. I had me a Jenny Heavy, dude. That's the I was repping the New York the New York folks for that one because my uncle used to drink Genesee when I was a kid growing up.
Mhm.
So it was like I've got like I think two 12 packs downstairs, and that's for the deer hunting. That's for when
Yep.
I kill a deer and I'm going to have it here at the house. It's like I have a Jenny Heavy,
Yep.
for him.
Yep.
But
That's awesome. Hey,
yeah,
there's a real thing. There's two things. There's a real thing about killing a deer in the morning and being able to enjoy it compared to killing one at night. But at night,
hmm
it is like if you got, a group of buddies going in the pitch black and the flashlights first hit them, that's a real thing right there.
oh
But
yeah, yeah.
dude, if you're gonna kill one, I don't care, morning or night. You kill one like Friday, and you have the whole weekend after. Oh, like that feeling right there, and it's like and it's cold enough that you don't have to take care of them right away. You can just hang there,
Yep.
get the whole rest of the weekend. Or it's like maybe you had plans to hunt all weekend, but if I kill one Friday, I am not hunting the rest of the
Oh,
weekend. I'm just
dude.
enjoying it.
Dude, it was the same season. Like I was living my wife was making fun of me because I was living my best life because I shot that deer and then went to the plains, shot the deer there. And that was at night and some buddies helped me drag him out. And we got out of there super late out of the timber. And so it was cold enough. They all went hunting the next morning because they all still had tags. And I was at my travel trailer and the deer was in the back of my truck. I was going to get him to the butcher and the taxidermist and all that stuff. And I got up the next morning. I'm on hunting clock, so I woke up at like 6 a.m. anyway. You know what I mean? And I was like, and everything was such a blur like that night because we were getting pictures, getting out, like blah blah blah, the whole thing. And so I sat down at like 7 o'clock in the morning, cracked me a Jenny Heavy on the tailgate, and sat there with the deer at like 7 o'clock in the morning, putting back a Cody
We're
before I
just
took it to the edge and soaking it in,
just
man. I was
rallying.
like, yeah, dude. I was like, I've got because that was the second day of like a 14 days that I had off.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I was like, man, I got like 12 more days. So I went and did some glassing like one day in a different area that I might want to hunt.
Yep.
Went to Iowa and visited with a buddy for a couple of days. Like it was like the best dude vacation ever. I was by myself in my travel trailer, just like tearing up the Midwest. It was awesome.
Your wife's back at home looking at the Life 360 app, going, "What
Yeah.
the hell is he doing out there?"
She was like, because she asked me, she's like, "Hey, you gonna come home?" And I said no. I was like, actually, I've got 12 more days. Like, I said, I think I'm gonna slip through Missouri and go back to that spot where I hit that one and lost it like 2 years ago. And she was like, she just looked at me. She said, "Freezer's full, bud." That was it.
It's time
And
to
then I
come
was,
home.
yeah, and I was like, all right. I was like, well, I'm gonna swing through Iowa and see John before I come home. I was like, but I'll
There you
be
go.
home in a couple days. So,
Yep, for
but
sure.
man, speaking of having killer seasons and stuff, dude, you had a hell of a season for the ages last year. I want to dive into a little bit of that because you killed, was it two in Michigan? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I killed one in Nebraska, two in Michigan, and one in Illinois last year.
Yeah. So which one was earliest?
Yeah, so the earliest one was Nebraska. I killed him.
Nebraska.
Yep, went out to Nebraska on a solo trip. Jumped in. Well, I originally had plans to go out there with a group of guys, and then they end up getting suckered into having to go to some weddings. And
Oh,
I couldn't pass on the opener. The Nebraska opener was September 1, and there wasn't school wasn't really in yet, and there wasn't much going on in the family life. And my wife's like, just go, and I had never taken a solo trip like that on my
hmm.
own, and I said, what, I'm gonna do it, and what I did, Clint, is I went out there 2 days beforehand. Opening day was on a Sunday, and so I left early Friday morning. And by the time I got out there, it's like a long haul. It's like 12,
Hmm.
13, 14 hours for me to get out there. And got out there mid-afternoon. But you gotta think, it's September 1, or this is August 30th when I arrived out there, where it doesn't get dark till quite late, And so
Yeah.
I was like, I can still get some scouting in and just went out there. There was a bunch of public land, jumped on a piece, scouted it, kind of cut it. I came to an area that had some of the beans had some browsing pressure, but I couldn't get over how freaking tall the beans were out there. Like I was like, I don't even know, like, are these, will they even want to eat these? Like they were so tall. But that browsing pressure was like a point that I kind of stuck in the back of my mind, where it's just a nice low spot outside this, finger of cover, and onto the other pieces I went. Well, the day this was so critical, the day before I got there, it downpoured out there. And when I'd been watching the weather, like they weren't getting any rain. So when they got the rain, like I'm pretty sure it was probably much needed for them. But you've been out to Kansas, they get those gully washers of a rain, dude. It will wash those roads like
Hmm.
clean. And so I get out there that first day, I kind of have that second half of that day to scout, and then in my mind, I'm like, dude, I'm gonna glass up. Oh, this is gonna be like cake work out here to glass a big buck up. That first night, I never even glassed a buck, not a single one, and I was like, holy shit! Like I was like that. I wasn't expecting that. Like I thought I'd be able to
Right.
get out here and there's not a lot of cover. It's very much like kind of Kansas type out there. A lot of
Hmm.
fingers and draws and not really square woodlots or anything. But anyways, it got dark that night. Got up the next morning. I was like, because a lot of times, Clint, if I struggle glassing one at night, you can almost bet, at least in Michigan, if I can't locate a deer I'm looking for at night, that next morning, I got some flexibility with my life. Is that next morning I can get back out there and I'll probably find him the next morning. Like he just probably came out too late. So I was like, well, I'll take that same game plan out to Nebraska, and I got up early the next morning, and I was along like I was where I decided to start hunting compared to where I was staying was like an hour and a half away. So it was a good hike.
Yeah.
I got up super early, made my way up there, and I was like, all right, I'll find one in the morning. And it was probably 60 to 90 minutes after, gray light hit, and I can't find one. So I just did the only thing I knew how to do is I was like, I'm gonna pull over, I'm gonna put these damn boots on, and I'm gonna go scouting. Well, just as I was getting ready to pull over, in 2018 in northern Michigan, I had spent some time just traveling and watching guys hunt bears with hounds. Okay.
Mm.
And I'll never forget the amount of time they would spend with their heads out the window, driving these dirt roads and sand trails looking for tracks. And remember, I said it had rained so bad the day before I got there. and all these roads are all dirt and they're all washed. I can tell there hasn't been vehicles down them. Well, just as I'm about to pull over and put my boots on, I said, you know what? Look at these roads, David. Like you should be looking if maybe we can cut a track from one last night and that thing is going to be within hours fresh. And so that's what I did. I decided to start driving around and boom, cut the track. Cut the kind of track that I had came there for, and it was one lone track. Because I remember getting out and video and with my phone, just I don't know, I'd probably send it to a couple of buddies, and I was like, he's here somewhere. We just got to figure it out. Well, from that road, parked the truck right there, Clint. Took off right, followed his track right down the edge of a cornfield and right down into this finger. Well, when I got down to the finger, I ended up bumping that deer up. And this is the day before the opener, so this is August 31st. And not that I was completely closed-minded, but I knew I was like, this is it. That I'll kill this deer in this area. I'm going to be here for a week. I should be able to kill this deer in this area. So as soon as I bumped him up, I left that area because the thing is, the finger he was in happened to be where he was bedding was that same finger that I had talked about where that browsing pressure was on that bean field, but that bean field was on the other side of the finger from where I just walked in because there was corn on one side of the finger, then beans on the other side of the finger, and he was laying in there, but he had come down the edge of that cornfield. And I'll tell you a story about a local here in a second bit. And now it makes a lot more sense to me why. But I let that deer be, and I was like, I still have a half a day in me. Like, let's just go keep scouting other stuff, and we'll wait for opening day tomorrow. Went scouted, and I still attempted to glass that second night and got my ass handed to me, man. I could not, I'd never glass. I'd never seen a buck from my truck out there.
That's
like,
crazy.
ever. Yeah, wild, right? Well, opening morning came, and I was like, I'm gonna go try hunt him in the morning. I had no intentions to hunt him in the morning, but I'm an extremely aggressive hunter, and I like to. I always say it like I hunt with my back against the wall, and I don't care if I'm in my home state of Michigan or if I was out in Nebraska. Like I still hunt with that same concept. I have no issues either. We're gonna kill the deer will be in the next county, one or the other, and we're gonna figure it out. Well, went out there the next morning, no show. Never seen a deer. He never came back in there, no nothing. But I didn't exactly like where I was set up. When it came to, so as I'm sitting there that morning, I'm kind of picking different trees and I see it. All I need to do is move. It's less than 100 yards down this finger. And I was like, I like that spot a little bit better. Puts me a little bit closer to where that low spot was in that browsing pressure. Well, I went out that night and the cicadas, dude, out there were unbelievable. I couldn't even
Dude,
hear myself.
they'll drive you crazy.
It was unbelievable, and I self-filmed it out there, and it was like even on the video, it's like yeah, I can remember my youngest daughter. She's like, "What in the hell is that noise, Dad?" I was like, "It's a freaking bug. You can't hear shit out there." Well, I go out there that night, and I got out there probably 4 o'clock, and it probably doesn't even get dark till like 8:30, 9 o'clock on September 1st. And it wasn't shortly after like 5 o'clock, I happened to look way out in that bean field, and here he comes. He must have been bedded out in that beans, which those beans, I'm not the tallest guy in the world. I'm 5'8". Those beans are up to my shoulders out there. So when he stood up, all I could do is see his rack. That's it. But I'll never forget when he stood up and he's working his way. I'm looking at him like, what in the hell is that deer? Looks like it's just got long blonde hair like everywhere. I was like, what in the hell is going on? Well, what it was he had shed his velvet overnight, and he had all kinds of velvet, but all kinds of like grass, that real bright yellow, whitish looking grass, all stuck in it. And he come right down the pipe, right to 30 yards. He was working his way. What was interesting, he was working his way from the bean field into the finger like he was going to go out to the cornfield, and that was behind me. And the cornfield is about 80 yards away behind me. So it was like, to me, it was a picture perfect spot for the rut, but just happened to, cut his track, follow him down in there, bump him up. I was like, I don't care if it's the rut or not. Like, he's literally giving me a visual of what he's doing. I got to try it. Yeah. And I ended up shooting him at 30 yards, and he ran, I don't know, 60, 65 yards and piled up. And that was, I've never killed a deer in September. I've never even hunted a whitetails in September until last year. And then the realization kicked in that I was out there all by myself. I'm way far away from home. And I got lucky that I ended up knowing a few guys that were going to be in a different area of Nebraska. And I just got a hold of them. I said, dude, killed one. And they're like, we're on our way. I'm like, you guys are like 2 hours from here. You don't have to do that. And but sure shit, they said, no, we're
Yeah.
on our way. And I says, okay, I won't even blood trail them or anything. I'll wait for you guys to get here. And it's like we were talking about like soaking in that moment and shit where it's like that night. I'll never forget, once we got them pulled out of there, got them back to that truck and like sitting on the back of that tailgate, you know, 13 hours away from home, how bright those stars were at like 2 a.m. in the morning, and still thinking like I still have to drive hour and 40 minutes back to a freaking Airbnb tonight. Like I wouldn't trade it for the world though, but that's how
Yeah.
I kicked my season off last year is out there in Nebraska. But what I wanted to say about that corn in this plays a part is also not visually seeing any deer. I kind of did what a little bit like what you talked about in Kansas is I didn't go home right away. I spent the next day processing it and getting them caped out and everything like that. And I spent about 3 more days out there just kind of poking around, watching and looking for deer, walking some ground. And I seen an old farmer out and I stopped and talked to him and just to shoot the shit, and I
Hmm.
won't lie, he looked like he owned a bunch of land too. So I was like, well, I'll just feel the
Right.
situation out. And he had guys that hunt because I was thinking of the future. Like I'd love to go back in that area. This was all on public, and then who knows what other opportunities may be there. But I asked him, I said, man, I showed him the buck I killed, and he's like, man, that's awesome. And I said, but I said, man, I didn't see any freaking deer out in the beans. He goes, you're not going to see any deer out in the beans here. And he goes, these deer don't want to be seen because if they get seen, they get shot out here in the summertime. He's like, all the deer will be in and around the corn. And I was like,
Corn.
no shit. It would
Mm.
have been the complete opposite of what I thought, right? September
Yeah.
1, the beans are green, they're lush. So we're going to go out here and get one killed off these beans where that deer happened to be bedded in the beans. But I can't help but wonder, did he bed in the beans because I was down in that finger in the morning trying to kill him?
Yeah.
So that's something I'll never know.
Yeah, as soon as you said that corn, that was like where my mind went because that was one of the
Mhm.
lessons, going out to Kansas like the first year that Chad and I kind of learned. And that's kind of like one of our approaches is like, we try to find places that are kind of surrounded by ag, if you will, like some cover, like however big the piece may or may not
Mhm.
be. But we always want the adjacent properties to have the crops out.
Mhm.
That way, like they've got it because it's all out there, like probably similar to Nebraska. It's sections, right? So each section is
Yeah.
kind of like a mile, and so everyone kind of owns like a mile by mile kind of like chunk, like the farms or the ranches and stuff. And so if you can get the adjacent stuff, then you basically got 4 miles
Mhm.
around you that have no crops in or
Yep.
limited crops in, right? Because that's what we were finding. It was that we would go out to glass, it's a little easier if it's like Milo and stuff like that because it's a little shorter, so you can
Yep.
still see, right? But anywhere that there was corn, standing corn, if there was too much of it, I wouldn't say we would cross it off the list, but it would be kind of like the last place we would spend any time because it was just, unless they were running wild during the rut, like their chances are they weren't going to be visible and those does were going to run right to that corn anyway to hide,
Yep.
and so you're probably not going to see the bucks anyway. So
Yep.
that was kind of like, yeah, that was kind of my thought. I was like, I wonder if there's corn around there. As soon as you said it, I
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, I was like,
Yep. And
they're hiding up in that corn.
yeah, for sure. And what's wild about that story to me though, Clint, is like anyone could go out there and do that. Like it was simply
Hmm.
like just cutting his track on the road. Did the rain 48 hours beforehand help me out? Hell yeah, because if from what I understand, it's usually so dry that I may not have cut that track. Maybe I could have cut his track on the edge of that cornfield. Maybe we're a little more moisture in the ground. That could have been a possibility. But just cutting that track on that road that day and just walking it back, that's what eventually killed that deer. And that buck is the only buck I had seen in Nebraska while hunting or even just being out there. That was it, man.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. So then you went to then you were back home to Michigan, right? And
Yep.
then there was an October and then a November one,
Yep.
if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I
So
think your October one was around some dates that I like too, if I'm not
yeah.
mistaken.
So I actually, I actually missed a real big one on October 5th. I was on them pretty hard that opening week. I had October 5th. I shot. Well, I didn't miss him. I cut the hair on the top of his back, put a hole right in the top of him. But he ended up surviving. But I had seen him 2 times prior to that, and just kept kind of inching closer, inching closer. Got my opportunity, not making excuses, hit a limb a little bit, deflected a little bit high. He survived, so that was all good. But my second buck of the year, which was my first Michigan buck, I killed him on the evening of October 24th. And that was very interesting too, because that buck right there, I got to a point in October that I was struggling a little bit, and I knew I needed to put my boots on and go do some scouting. And what was interesting about that is, the old reliable SD card trail camera is probably what eventually led me to going into that area. It was a spot that I was looking to. I knew had some historical data in there. There's like a little time window that it usually gets good, but it's good, not great, so that,
Mm-hmm.
I just had a SD card regular trail camera in there, went in there on the 19th of October, scouted, decided to check that card, and there he was, a familiar face I knew about. I had only gotten one picture of him all summer on a totally different piece of ground than where he was, but as soon as I seen that he was in that swamp on October 19th, I knew that he would probably be in there for the rest of October, and went in there. My next opportunity to be able to hunt was October 24th, and he come marching right. There's a scrape right in there. Come marching to the scrape, come right to the base of my tree to the point where I had to let him work away, and end up shooting him at like 9 yards directly behind me. And he's just a big wide 7 point. Been around the block a few years here in Michigan, but it was
It's
a
awesome.
it was interesting because I'll never forget. You might if when I'm here in Michigan, my family loves to go out there and track deer. I can remember my wife standing there going, $2, hon. She goes, how many tags you got left? And I says, well, I got another one in Michigan and one in Illinois. I said, but I don't really. If I fill another one in Michigan, it's whatever. And she goes, huh, okay. And so that was my October buck in Michigan, but little did I know what was. I don't know what it was that stuck out to me about how she just kind of handled the situation, and she was like, I don't know if she had the intuition what was to come, or she was just worried about what maybe the taxidermy bill was going to end up like here. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And so then you had one that was it the 14th of November? Is that what it was? Was
the
that the date?
fourth, yeah,
The
my next
4th. I
one,
don't know why I thought the 14th, but yeah.
yep,
Okay. So early November.
yeah, early
So
November.
literally like 2 weeks later.
Yeah, yeah, and it was wild as I had only hunted one time in between those two kills. Yeah, so it was the 24th, and then I went back out on the 27th because we had an awesome cold spell here on the 27th here in Michigan.
Hmm.
Like it was like in the high 20s in that morning. With the evening of October 27th, I had two of my probably best Michigan encounters that this year. Like it was
Hmm.
fabulous. Where I'm like, things were just clicking. They were clicking well, and then November came around, and I knew I had a trip coming up to Illinois, but I wasn't going to do that. I usually what I've kind of been doing is leaving Michigan once our gun season starts, and our gun season starts on November 15th.
Gotcha.
And historically, I much like a lot of guys, I love that the 7th through the 10th of November. And the reality is I don't actually hunt a lot. Like if I hunt up to double digit days in a year, like that's a pretty good year for me just because the availability. And now, like I said earlier, with the girls getting older, it has become a lot easier for me to get some more hunting time in. Well, November 4th rolled around and I had zero intentions to hunt. Zero, absolutely zero. Not only was I kind of too busy with having to do kid things, the weather was dog shit. It was
Yeah.
71 degrees, it was rainy, and it was windy. But somewhere during the day, probably around that, so yeah, November 4th, so was that right after time change? I can't remember when time change. Yeah, had to
Yeah.
be right after.
Yeah. It was right
Yeah,
after,
it
I
had to be
think.
right after time change. So it was like 2 o'clock ish, right? And there's probably about 4 hours of daylight left. All of a sudden, my wife says, "Hey, I'll run Bailey out. I'll take her out to the dance studio. if you want to go hunting, you can. And I was like, well, I didn't have intentions to hunt. And I was like, plus the weather's kind of crappy. And she just simply said, she goes, you shouldn't waste your opportunity if you have a chance to go. She goes, we're all busy anyways. You don't have to worry about us. And so, oh shit, okay, maybe I'll go real quick. And I remember it being warm because I was like, I don't need a jacket, don't need a vest, and don't need nothing. Just need like a quarter zip and a pair of pants, and let's go hunting.
Mhm.
But then I had a decision to make because not only was I I hate the feeling of running late, and that
Yeah.
had that feeling because it was kind of like tossed on me that I could go kind of late in the afternoon like that. So I said, where could I go that I could get into with the? I remember we had like a southwest wind that day, especially with that warm temperature, and I knew a spot that I'd been scouting for years, and it always made sense if I took you in there, it always made sense, but it just never like produced a lot of like good, information on cameras or sightings. But it was always just one of those spots that I always kept in my back pocket. And I said, you know what? Man, I have nothing to lose. I'll go try it. And
Mhm.
honestly, Clint, this wasn't like an extremely like I'm on his ass. I'm gonna go hunt this deer.
Those are some of the best hunts, though, man. I like that.
Some of the best hunts, and I'll never forget as I'm getting ready to get out there, I get all my stuff at the base of my tree, and I'm extremely like routined how I like set a tree up, and I remember setting that pack down and looking up, and all of a sudden here comes about like a 90-inch 8 point chasing two does, and it like, when that happened, and they chased them right past the tree, could have shot them right there on the ground, and it was just like I've gotten really good at just trusting my gut, and in that moment it was like it's gonna be a good night.
Yeah.
Tonight will be a good night. Like and whether it's not like my mind it thinks it's gonna be a good night. I get set up in the tree, and not too long after it, I'm overlooking this big cattail swamp bedding area. Like, it's November now, so some of these grasses are starting to lay down. So if a buck's coming out of there, I'll be able to see them. Well, I catch moving up there, and I see a small spike coming out, and it's basically right in between two kind of bedding areas. But what's going to happen is these bucks, what they'll do with that southwest wind, they'll come out of this bedding area from the north, and they'll go to the next bedding area to the south. Now, you can this is all on video. In the video it looks pretty open minus this little strip of just thick cover that's what they like to travel from the bedding area to the north to the bedding area to the south. And dude, it wasn't, oh my gosh, it wasn't, I don't even know if it was an hour of sitting there. I think it was like at short like 4:04 p.m. or so. I look up, and here comes this. It is a no doubter here in Michigan. Just big, heavy, just a heavy weight of a Michigan buck. And as soon as I see him coming out of that bedding area, I know exactly he's going to come right down the pipe. And he gave me enough time. I could get all the cameras rolling. It worked out perfectly. Came to 18 yards and killed that buck that night. And what was funny is when I shot him, I was like, man, I don't recognize him, and I had to really go back and look at some pictures, and it took pictures from a whole different property to figure out where this buck was, and those pictures I didn't find out till later on in the season because I pulled like an SD card and some soaker cameras. It wasn't, 2 or 3 days before that, like he was, just over a mile away on a different piece, and I'm like, it's that hunt right there was just simply going, dude, I have the opportunity. Luckily, I had some spots that I, kind of had in my back pocket, somewhat near home that I could jump in that area and get one killed like that. And
Yeah.
that was on, yeah, November 4th, and election day was the next day. So we were riding a pretty big high, three
Yeah.
bucks. And I had never killed 3 bucks in a year, and knowing
Right.
I had a one more trip, coming up, and it was like all I could think about was I'm just playing with house money now.
Dude, how great is that, man? I love whenever you have that feeling of, you got a tag or two filled already, and now, anything you do after that, you're just kind of like, man, it's gravy from here. Like, I'm just
Mhm.
going to go let it rip. It's almost like that, I don't know, like if you're like when you're doing motocross, right? Like you're racing and you're just having one of those days where it's like, look, I've won 2 races in the past like 2 weeks, and this race here, it's like I feel real good. I'm just gonna go out and let it rip. Like
Yep.
it's like you
It's
just
like
have that confidence, what I mean?
yeah,
Where it's just like
I almost feel like, I don't want to say that you can't do anything wrong, but like you just have this feeling of like whatever I do, it's going to work out.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
it's a flow state that it's
Yeah.
just that we used to talk about a lot in racing, like when you were just when you are one with the bike and it's just everything's flowing how it's supposed to be, like things just feel right. And
Almost like in slow motion.
yeah, yeah. Well, and what's wild is I the year before that I had another in 2023. I killed two bucks, one in Michigan and one in Kansas, and both of them awesome hunts, right?
Mhm.
But there was also like I lost a deer in Michigan that I still can't wrap my head around. I still believe is fully dead. I've never devoted so much time looking for a deer, reviewed the footage 1,000 times. Whereas like I had a really good year in 23, but I had like I'm not saying I'm superstitious, but like that deer, losing that deer that in Michigan in 2023, like I couldn't help but wonder if it wasn't going to put a black cloud on this next year, where I didn't go into this year saying I'm going to kill 4 bucks. I wanted to
Mhm.
kill a buck, but I wanted a nice, clean kill. Like a no
Mhm.
doubt, that's a he's dead. We just got to go recover him and pull him out, kind of thing. So, getting that first one in September, like I never expected that, and then a nice, clean kill. That second one in Michigan, nice clean kill. That third one, a nice clean kill. Where it's like, okay, like I was really happy with all of that, but little did I know what was coming next after honestly all of that.
Yeah, so let's jump into that, man. I want to talk. I want to hear about the Illinois trip.
Yeah, so never hunted Illinois a day in my life. Never
Okay, all right.
drove through it a bunch though in my lifetime. Going out. We had some friends out in Missouri. Driving. Whether it's going out to Iowa, whatever the case, Kansas. I've drove through it, so I have an idea of what it looks like, right? But kind of like what we talked about earlier about leaning on people and whatnot. Is I got a good buddy here in Michigan that he's hunted Illinois before, and somewhat in this general area. Region of Illinois, so I'd ask him, what's it look like? What'd you see? What, when you had encounters, where would those be? And just trying to get a feel of it. But I would be lying if I didn't say like, being able to go out to Nebraska and even in 23 and going out to Kansas, showing up in Kansas, reading the sign on day one, then killing on day two, the same kind of thing that happened in Nebraska. Like I was like, well, I'm just going to keep playing that same game going out to Illinois. And that's what I did. I left out on the 14th and I scouted on the 14th, did some scouting, and I tried to hunt on the 15th. And then on the day of November 16th, got my ass handed to me in the morning. I mean, it just literally handed to me. And what's funny, Clint, is, we talk about scouting and reading the sign, but also trying to be like a student of the game. I get done with the second day of hunting, so it's November 16th, because I hunted on the 15th also, but I scouted midday, and I'm sitting in my truck and I'm looking at a lot of vehicles in parking lots on this public land. There's no denying that. And I'm looking at the map. I'm like, man, what do I want to do tonight? Like, I'm not completely sold on what I seen. The sign that I found on day one, it's phenomenal, but it's middle of November now, and I can't promise that that's recent sign. Like that sign could have been there when that 800 acres of corn was up next door. Right? Who knows?
Right.
It wasn't screaming to me fresh like you had to be here. And then the other hunters was, there was no doubt there's some other guys in there, but the other hunters don't honestly bother me that bad, because where I come from in Michigan, like I don't have sole permission to hunt anything. Like I'm used to guys. Like I do not like guys do not get in my head, and they will not ruin my hunt. And I'm sitting there and I'm texting with a buddy back home, and I say, yeah, I sent him a picture of all the trucks, and he's like, oh my God, that's gotta suck. I was like, no, it just tells me I just need to be elsewhere. And I'm driving down the road, Clint, and I leave this public land, right? And I'm driving down the road, and I'm gonna go back and get some lunch, and I drive over this bridge, and I remember looking down off this bridge going, dude, that looks like an Illinois river bottom if I've ever seen one. Like if someone was gonna paint a picture, that looks like one. And I was like, man, I would love to hunt down there. It just looks so freaking sweet. And I got caught daydreaming in the truck because next thing I know, someone's honking behind me. And I had come to a complete stop. Like I was just in awe of how it looked, dude. Like
Right.
I was stuck in the moment. Like I don't know, I was just soaking it in. They're honking at me and they got their hands up in the air. So I'm like, oh shit. So I pull up, put my hazard lights on, and just pull off to the side of the road. And what I have in my mind is I do this a lot when I see areas that I like or I have success in areas or whatever. I want to look at it on the map and see if I can maybe copy and paste this into a
Yep.
piece of public land or knock on door permission. I don't care wherever you want to hunt.
Right.
And so I want to look at what this river bottom looks like because it looks the part. It looks like this is where I could kill a big one. I open up the map, I'm looking at it, and for some odd reason, I was like I went to like zoom back out to look at some public land. I was like, oh shit, I don't have my public land layer on. Like it was off.
Mhm.
So I turned it on, and when I turned it on, I was like, I'm sitting in public land right here. Like this is public land. Yeah, like I was like, I was so focused on like going to the next, just what I was gonna do midday where like that like I realized I'm like, David, you made a mistake there. Like you should have known this was public land right here.
Right.
And so once I realized it's that, I start looking at the map going, oh, I could hunt this. And I'm working up the river and just kind of looking at different things and how could I access this? And this is where I talk about being a student of the game and maybe, applying information even though someone's, situation's totally different than yours. I come to a spot on the map, Clint, that for some reason, when I looked at it, I goes, you know who would hunt here? Bobby Worthington would hunt right here. Like this would be his, like if he
Yeah.
picked a spot on the map, he'd say that right there, that's where one's going to come through. But here was
Mhm.
the only issue with that, Clint. There was two spots like that and they weren't
Okay.
far from each other. And I said, that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to drop in their blind tonight, strictly off of terrain, which is the opposite of what I get to do in Michigan, right? I have a
Mhm.
lot of edge in Michigan, but I don't get terrain features like this. I don't get hills like that. I'm super
Right.
green to it. But I said that this makes all the sense in the world. I can access through this way up the river. I'll jump up this river bank. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the smaller of the two. There's two funnels, basically where the top of the ridge dumps down into to the river there.
Mhm.
And it kind of just it's like a flat spot right there. And this is where we talk about letting deer show you how they want to traverse the terrain. So I get my shit on that night. I go wading down the river, get up there, first tree off the bank, boom, I'm set up. Like I feel good about it. Like I feel like even though this is only day 2 of my trip, I'm thinking I'm gonna spend some time in here. Like this looks the spot, and I'm a very visual person. Like if it looks right to me and it feels right, like my head's in it.
Yeah.
And well, it probably wasn't. I don't know. Within that first hour, I start hearing a buck grunt, and then I'm like listening. I'm like, dude, there's two buck grunts. There's two buck grunting, but they were to the west of me. And what was happening is we had a southeast wind that day. So that southeast wind, that wind was rolling off the top of those ridges and kind of coming down and dumping into that river. And so in my mind, I said this was a perfect opportunity for a buck to say, come from the west and work east and be able to scent check all of that shit, all those does that may be bedded up. And I had no idea if there's does bedded up there, but in my mind, I'm telling myself that like that's what that there's does bedded up there. A buck will come through this river bottom and be able to scent check all that. And as these thermals drop at night, it's going to even make it better.
Hmm.
And so I hear these buck grunting, these two bucks grunting. I'm like, here we go. Like this is what we came to Illinois for, right? And I can't see them. I'm looking hard to the west. I'm looking, and they are taking forever to get to me. And finally, I get a visual on them. And when I see them, they're in the bigger of the two funnels. Okay, I'm sitting in the smaller one, and they're in the bigger one to the west of me. Well, I'm like, they're going to come right down the pipe. If they hit that funnel, they're coming to me next. well, that's not what they did. And what was
Hmm.
oddly enough, they didn't have a doe with them or anything. I don't know why those two bucks were grunting. I'll still wonder why today, why they were vocalizing like that. But what happened, Clint, is about halfway in between that big funnel and the small funnel that I was sitting in, they went up, they side hilled all the way up to the top of that ridge. Like it was almost like they didn't have a they didn't there was no reason for them to come through the funnel that I was in, or that they smelled something up there and they side hilled that entire ridge up there.
Hmm.
But at that moment, before I went to Nebraska this year and Kansas in 23 in Illinois this last year, I have this thing in my head. I tell myself, I don't want to ever leave anything on the table. When I drive home, it doesn't matter to me if I drive home with a tag in my pocket. What matters to me is if I know I left it all out there.
Yep.
And so as soon as I seen those two bucks side hill that up to the top of that ridge, Clint, once they are out of the clear, boom, start packing my shit up because I'm going to that bigger funnel now. Now it's not far. It's 54 yards from the other one, but I was like, I had like 45 or 43 minutes of light left. But in my mind, I was like, I'll at least be set up for tomorrow morning. I'll be ready to
Yeah.
go. And I'll never forget the feeling because it was like I knew I rushed, right? So I was like, I'm not taking my jacket or anything off. So by the time I'm, tore down that set, 54-yard move, picked another tree, set that one up, I was just sweating. I was like, gosh dang it, and I had this feeling. I was like, I was like, I'm not gonna get the camera and the camera arm and all that bullshit back out tonight. And I'm sitting there in about 10 minutes and I was like, you know what? Let's just get the camera arm out. I don't have to get the camera. Let's get the camera arm out. It's ready to go tomorrow morning because I'm going to kill one here in the morning. Like I was like, I text my buddies like I'll kill one here tomorrow morning. And
Yeah.
what was wild is once I got the camera arm set up, I was like, ah, fuck it. I might as well get the camera out too, right? Like that'd
Right.
be
Yeah. Yeah.
stupid
Exactly.
not to, right? Because I
So they
had
have
this
the arm
feeling
out.
like
Like the
right,
hardest part's done.
right, yeah. And I was like, because if something comes through here and I don't get to show my girls, like, well, look at this cool encounter in Illinois, like I'd be pretty upset with myself. And so I get the camera out and I turn that thing to me and I just start talking to it, like I can see it in
Mhm.
my face looking back at the film that like I was like, not exhausted, but just kind of sweaty and
Mhm.
probably a little pissed off from, being wrong. And, those two bucks I forgot to say is one wasn't a very big buck and the other one he's probably about 120, 125-inch deer. And it would like honestly, if he would have came down the pipe, I would have killed that deer that day. Or
Oh
it
yeah.
was just dropping in like that and the scenario playing out how it was supposed to. I definitely would have.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can see it in my face that I kind of feel like I maybe set up wrong that first time. And but I say it to the camera. I say, I'm in the spot now that there's a deer walking around in Illinois that this will be his last night walking around because I felt, dude, I was like, I like to hunt confident. Like that's super
Hmm.
important to me. I was like, I'm killing one in the morning. Did whatever, talk to the camera, then turn the camera off. And I don't know, 25 minutes later, I kind of look up on the edge of that river and I can see the brisket of a deer, but I can't see his head. But when I look at that brisket, it was instant grab your damn bow. Like this is
Right.
like something's about to happen, and whatever the deer's brisket that is, like
Hmm.
that's probably what we came here for. And he's standing there, just kind of taking all his senses in, and it was real kind of grassy river bottom, so I never did hear him, and I knew where he was standing. He was coming through the bigger of the two funnels that I had first ever seen on the map. And that buck, awesome, and he breaks that tree. I was like, oh my god, dude, that thing is a giant. And he's walking straight to me, and I'm probably 8, 9 foot up in a tree, and I'm like, but by the time I grabbed my bow and he was still standing there, that allowed me to get that camera back on him. And so the camera, it's awesome. He's walking straight into me, but he knows something's not right. And he gets to about 9 yards and he's still facing me. But I'm in a saddle and he's on my weak side. He's at like my 2 o'clock, and I'm like, I got the camera arm right there too. I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna blow this opportunity. Like I take pride in being able to get an animal close and get him killed, and he's at 9 yards, and I am not going to get this animal killed because I know
Hmm.
he has enough sense to him. Because what he should do, if he doesn't break, if he never, if he didn't stop, he's going to walk right in front of the tree, and I'm going to shoot him as he walks away at like 8 yards. That's going to be the
Hmm.
plan. Well, and he stops and he kind of looks up in the tree and knows something's wrong. So what he does is he takes a hard right, and now he's going to head right to the base of that ridge, and he's going to walk up it. Well, hey, I'm a bow hunter, so when I'm like I go way out on a left foot out on a tree limb, and I'm just looking for an opportunity. Where is the window? I'm looking ahead, looking ahead, looking ahead, but he's walking hard away from me. And all of a sudden, I'm like, there's a window there. That's 35 yards. I know it a hard number because I remember when I first got up in that tree, I checked what is my windows here?
Hmm.
Where's like, and I remember I was like, that's the farthest I could shoot in here is going to be 35 yards. But the problem is he was walking away. And so in my mind, I knew I said, David, you're going to have to come to full draw and you're gonna have to stop him, but you're gonna stop him with like some force to see if he's gonna just bolt out of here, or he's gonna turn towards you with the like what the hell was that?
Hmm.
And I get the full draw and he hits that and I stop him and that's exactly what he does. He just boom, just kind of opens himself up. He's still quartering away pretty damn hard, but he's looking back like what the hell was that? And it kind of surprises me because he already knew something was wrong right there.
Hmm.
And I'm aiming towards like that very last rib on his left side because I know he's hard quartering away. It's honestly the hardest quartering away deer I've killed before, and it's the longest shot I've ever taken on a whitetail. And I don't shoot lighted nocks, and I shoot, and I know this arrow hits this. Like I can hear it hit him, but he runs straight up to the top of that ridge,
Hmm.
but then it gets quiet.
Hmm.
But I haven't scouted up there. I can't tell you. Is it grassy? Did he lay down? I don't know what happened. I knew he stopped. I seen him stop, but then it just got quiet. And I'm just like, I have no cell phone service, right? So I get out of there and I instantly FaceTime my wife and daughters, and they went on a weekend trip to New York, and they're in this nice restaurant, and I'm just losing it on FaceTime, just saying all kinds of shit, and my wife's like, "You're kidding me. You didn't kill a deer. Like you just got there 2 days ago." I'm like, "I'm dead serious." And I'm like, "It's a freaking giant." And well, we get back and luckily my buddy Aaron, he does so much with editing and stuff. He's able to
Hmm.
put the film on a computer and really slow it down and kind of figure out what happened. But it was still tough because I didn't have lighted nocks, right? Well, eventually we zoomed in enough that we see the air. We're tracking the arrow flying through the air, but we can't exactly tell where it hits them. But what we do see is we see what we think is like a tuft of hair change on his left rear hip. And I'm like, and I know like the way he was quartering, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to get a pass through right there because I just got out of there. I just marked where he was standing. You could smell him where he was, but we just got out of there. Well, we all kind of, not we all, but me, my buddy, and Aaron had a cameraman, and then actually the Airbnb owner that I met out there, he wanted to go out there with us. He's like, I'd love to go out there and track with you, and we're like, perfect,
Right.
let's go. We all kind of collectively agreed that at best I hit that rear artery, and we'll know right away with the blood what we're getting into. Let's give it 50 to 100 yards. Read the blood. If it's an artery, he'll be bleeding a lot and he'll be dead. And this, once again, I found myself quite a ways away from the Airbnb. So by the time we got back, reviewed it, got back, dude, we're talking 3 or 4 hours later now.
Yeah.
So, which is good, right? Because it gave them
Yeah.
time, and I'm not being, rammy on the deer or anything. So we jump on, and all of a sudden I hear we got blood, and I'm terrible. I'm extremely red green colorblind. I can't see blood worth a damn, and so like my spot in a blood trail is the last blood location. Like I understand that, so
Hmm.
I'm hearing that they got blood and I got blood and we get up to the top of the ridge where he stopped and Clint, he's dumping blood. I mean, just buckets. But inside this buckets of blood is a ton of bubbles. And
Hmm.
that's when we all were like, okay, this is not a rear artery hit. Like we didn't hit
Right.
that. He's bleeding a lot, but he's got, I mean, just a ton of bubbles in it. Well, we keep blood trailing him. And next thing you know, we're leading down to a body of water. And I'm talking, he's beelining right towards the water. We get to the edge, and I was like, I'm set my pack down. Like I'm gonna take my jacket off because like he's gonna be in this water. But all of a sudden they say it got blood, and all of a sudden it's up on the edge of it. Now he's walking away from it, and it wasn't, I don't know, 40 yards outside of that body of water. He ended up laying down and dying. But what happened there is I got one lung, perfect entry. Like if he was broadside, perfect entry. Where like technically for that shot, I hit him a little far forward. Like I hit him right in the double lung if he was broadside. So I got him one lung on his left, but then it drove up into like his lower cavity of his chest.
Just ripped everything apart. Yeah.
And he carried the arrow with him the entire time. Like whenever you covered him, the arrow was still in him. So, but he did, like, he ran over 800 yards though. And to
Wow.
recover, a one lung hit deer, I felt very fortunate. But I mean, the amount of blood, he had no more blood in him. Like
Yeah.
when I got it on that night, like you didn't need gloves. There was nothing left in him. But it was just wild, and once again, I can remember, not getting back till 3 a.m. that night, and how bright the stars were in the middle of nowhere, a place I'd never been, just trying to, didn't read any sign to kill that deer, just read what train was there, and then letting the deer tell me what to do, and then just being aggressive with moving, right? 10 years ago, I would have never moved like that. I would have never packed my shit up with 45 or 43 minutes to go to be prepared for the next day. I would have probably just stayed there and rode it out, but
Right.
just
And
letting
that was the key.
deer.
That was the key to killing that deer. Was that move?
100%.
I mean, that was like, yeah. I mean, that was without that you probably just watched that deer that night.
Yep, I think that buck comes right through that bigger of the two funnels, and then side hills, just like those two other bucks did. Because they're like, after watching them do that, like afterwards, like I've played that hunt out 100 times in my head. I'm like, there's no reason he doesn't do that. Like he would have most likely done and who's to say that a doe didn't come through there? This was November 16th, so the way he acted, like he was back up on his feet looking for another opportunity with a female, and who's to say something didn't come through there earlier during the day before I even dropped in there.
Right. And that sounds about right for that time frame, right? Because I mean, you have that first window of breeding, right? And then usually, it'll die down, sometime. I like that window too, regardless of where I'm at, like usually like the 6th through the 10th, roughly ish, right? 6th through the 11th. And then it goes quiet for 3 to 5, 4 or 5 days, whatever it is, right? And then usually around that, like somewhere in that 13th, 14th, 15th ish, they'll start to trickle out. Like the earlier does that got bred, like those bucks will come off, and et cetera, right? And so you're kind of hitting that second wave. So you're probably right, especially if there was 2 other bucks in there. My guess is like, yeah, there was a doe that came through there at some point, and the deer in the area are pathing through trying to pick her up.
Yeah. And, there's always like, one side of the coin to the other, or maybe I do move, but then a better deer comes through the other funnel, right? Like you could always think like that. But the one thing, like if I would have drove home from that trip and not made that move, that would weigh heavy on me for a long time, and maybe other deer would die of it later, later on, and down the road, like we talk about lessons learned, but like and that's why, like, it doesn't always have to be such a giant move. That was a 54-yard move from one tree to the other, where I think it's those little moves like that, especially with bow hunting, that could make or break the whole ordeal.
Yeah, it's the spot within the spot, right? We talk a lot about that, and that's the difference, right? It's like letting the deer tell you where the spot is, especially if you're not familiar with an area. You got to just watch what they're doing, and they're going to tell you exactly what they're going to do. You just gotta be open to it. But
yeah, I do want to hit on this though, real quick, Clint. Is we talked about chasing like the unknown. There, and I've seen it because I was very fortunate. Like my buddy Aaron had a cameraman out there, and Aaron runs a camera, so this was all videotaped, the recovery. And when we recover them, Clint, this has never happened to me, and I don't know if it's just because it's most of the time we know what kind of deer we're chasing. I I had to take a second to like before I picked him up because I didn't know what I was picking up. Like I had no clue. I had an idea, right? Because we watched back in the film and we could tell he was big and it looks like he's got this many points, but like it took me a second before I wanted to like pick him up. And what was so wild is during that second or those couple seconds, all of a sudden I could feel my watch vibrate. I thought, that's weird. Like I'm kind of surprised my wife would call me because she knows we're tracking. But she was actually FaceTiming me, and I answered, and she was like, "I'm looking for an update." And I was like, "You're not going to believe it," but that was really special to me because we recover all my deer together except for if I'm out of state, and it just happened to be they FaceTime right in that exact moment before I touched him. So when I got to pick him up, like they got to see what it was, but it was. Not knowing what exactly he was, like that was a really cool feeling. And I don't know years ago if I would have ever said I'd be like, I want to know everything about him before I kill him, where it was like that was a pretty badass feeling, honestly.
Yeah, man. I remember the one in the plains when I shot that one. That was the same type of thing. Like I knew he was big. Like when I saw him approaching, I didn't really have a clue how big, he was just a no doubter. That was all I knew. It was like, I'm going to shoot him. Right. And when I walked up on him, it was like, golly, and then, and I still didn't even it still didn't register for me for like a while, but like my buddies like walked up on him. We hit the light with him. Well, cause they joined me to drag him out, put the light on him, and they could just see like one side of the rack sticking up and they're like, holy smokes. And I'm like, it's like one of those things where it's, and it didn't really even matter. It was more about like what you were talking about, which was, that whole experience of not knowing made it that much more exciting. Right. And I think that not knowing, to bring this thing full circle, man, I think that not knowing is what keeps us engaged and keeps us coming back. It's like, even if we know an area, it's like, what part of it can we change to where we don't know a little bit? And that's the part that we want to explore and find out. Right. Yeah. And that's the exciting part, but cool, man. Well, buddy, I appreciate you coming on here, dude. I've kept you just about 2 hours. I'll be sensitive to your time, let you get back to your family. But before I let you go, let people know where they can find out more about you, where they can find your podcast and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I don't do too much on Facebook, but you can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty active on that. It's just D. Riley Jr. is my personal Instagram. And then I run the Method podcast that launches every other Wednesday. So it's just every 2-week podcast drops, and you can find that. That's just the Method podcast, same Instagram page. But Clint, I appreciate you coming on. I know I'm a little long-winded, so I appreciate the time.
No way, man. I love it. It was perfect. And you got an open invite anytime you want to come on, dude. We'll have to catch up sometime during the season. And maybe one of these days our paths will cross and do some scouting or share a camp together or something.
Sounds good, buddy. Thanks again.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tacticam, Osseo Gear, Hawk Optics, Face Off E-Bikes, and Lathrop & Sons Boot Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.